This is a lecture on emotional clearing and how to deal with chronic, repetitive, negative emotions, or what we've come to label as negative emotions, or that being emotions that we would rather not feel. So, chronic sadness, fear, anger, loneliness, despair, rage, all of those. Before I can get into the theory of shadow work, which I believe is probably the most powerful self-help and self-healing technique on the planet anywhere, I have to get into the theory because, like anything else, I could describe the practice of how to do shadow work, but without getting into the theory, I would be leaving that to implication, which I don't want to do. So there are things about emotion that I know to be true. And I think that when it comes to kind of these more woo-woo concepts of energy and chakras and emotional storage, that the more woo-woo of us will be vindicated in the long run, just because something is not fully understood now, or we lack the tools to measure things like emotional energy and the auric field and chakras directly. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means maybe objective empirical science can't comment on it right now. But this is a problem, I think, in our modern age. Now I'm giving this lecture in the year 2024, that we're every bit as ruled by a church-like orthodoxy as Galileo was back in the day. We've just now have the church of scientific material reductionism, which does not regard the fact that science only deals with what is empirically observable as a limitation of science. It's come around and said only the empirical is what exists, which is incredibly ignorant. So what I know to be true from my own work and others that I've spoken to and worked with in depth on this is that emotions are stored in the body, and emotions are a form of energy with a vibration and a resonance that affects the internal environment as well as the external, which we'll get into maybe in another lecture. It might be a little too much for this one, but emotions, in my experience, are not stored in the brain. If we are measuring effects going on in the brain in terms of the activity of the brain, that's a resonance or a harmony, but not the emotion itself. Much like if you have an operating system on your hard drive, you see the hard drive spinning and the various machinery of your laptop or device running, but that doesn't mean that's where the operating system is. The operating system is something a little more ethereal than that. It can be stored elsewhere, right? So when it comes to emotions, we feel the emotional blockages in the body. I believe they can manifest in various states of unwellness and disarray, or potentially a disease within the body. And chronic recurring negative emotions are a sign that these energies need to be purged from the body. And one thing about this is we've learned that we have this ability for repression. If you feel sad, you repress that. We learn that from an early age, and repression is critical. We have to learn to repress emotions in order to function as a part of a society. We can't just have people running around crying whenever they feel sad, or running around and screaming whenever they feel angry. And it's a good thing. So this is all about balance, and repression is not necessarily bad. It becomes bad when we have this immense backlog of back pressure in the emotional system, which is a part of your energetic system, a part of your bioenergetic system, that literally takes energy from your field in order to contain it, and really adversely affects your happiness and your ability to experience life to the fullest. So anything to the extreme is bad. When we're children, if we're upset, we cry. If little babies, they just let it out, right? If they're uncomfortable, they cry. If they're angry or perturbed, they cry, scream, and yell, and we learn how to function within a civilization by learning to keep a lid on these emotions through a process called internal monitoring and internal repression. And that's critical, but it ends up also creating toxicity within the system because as we age, sometimes we lose the ability to purge the emotional system and the bound emotional energies within the body that are stored. So there's an analog, right? If you feel, let's say, anger in the throat, this is one of my problem spots is when I was a kid, I had trouble expressing myself. I was told to shut up a lot, didn't get to talk a lot in my household. So I feel a lot of tension and tightness and constriction in my throat because that's expression happens in the throat chakra on the energetic level, which expresses itself outwardly in the body and has manifested in neck pain and throat issues. I've had a couple surgeries on my esophagus due to constrictive problems there, as well as muscular and skeletal issues in the neck. So there's harmony and overlap between these systems. But the problem is that in our culture we don't really have a system of expressing these emotions in the proper time and place. And the way you do that is to not make it a communicative exercise. So purging emotion from the system in the form of crying or getting in touch with your angry feelings or letting those feelings fully experiencing them for the purpose of letting them express themselves and ultimately purge themselves from the body. This is not something that you do to communicate something with the outside world or cry on somebody's shoulder. So this is, I think, a point of misunderstanding that I've gotten with people that think I'm some kind of advocate for safe spaces or emotional outbursts in public, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is not something that should be used to hose other people with. I'm a big fan of keeping a lid on it in public. I'm a fan of knowing how to repress and conduct yourself in public, but I'm not a fan of what happens to people when you have this wellspring of emotional energy that is it's been excessively contained. So what happens when people get older is the ego starts to ensconce itself around the emotional pain, and it becomes almost impossible for them to find the pain and express it at that point. And at that point, you have this malignancy of expression that we call personality. So I'm not a fan of personality. I'm not a fan of these schools of therapy that legitimize it, that say, oh, well, you have introverted people and you have extroverted people. So, well, you have traits and symptoms, and you've put labels on those traits. But an introverted person to me is just someone who carries a lot of social shame around and they don't express themselves enough. We talked about self-expression through the throat chakra that way. Or, you have agreeable people and you have disagreeable people. So, well, a healthy person knows how to balance and ping pong between agreeable and disagreeable when they need to be. Someone who's excessively agreeable, they have this layer of excessive people pleasing as another repression. It's another layer of repression that they've added to their pain, right? Their internalized level of emotional trauma. Or they're disagreeable, so they just hose everybody with their anger and everybody is intimidated by them and gets out of their way. But either way, I think there's really only one legitimate human personality, which is just the happy, confident, natural state. So let's talk about the nature of repression and happiness for a minute. I discovered early on that there are problems with these schools of thought that just teach direct, positive emotional management or mimicking positive emotions. They're not genuine. Faking being happy or putting a smile on your face, it can be another layer of repression that you put on top of this system that really needs to be unveiled and expunged in order to get at the core, which I call the natural personality or the natural happiness, which you'll just know it when you feel it. It just feels wonderful, feels clean, feels clear, feels natural. That's the best word if I can put emotions into words, which is probably a blasphemy at a certain point. But if we're going to label it, it would be a natural kind of happiness versus a forced kind of happiness that you just do to put your face on and get by that way. And again, that can just be used as one more layer of packing material that you use to repress the emotional rivers that are going on inside of you. So, how do you do it? The first thing is, again, this is almost a meditative like exercise that you do in private. This is not an exercise that you do to communicate to other people or to get some kind of result or make someone else feel sorry for you or to get something out of them in any way. This is entirely a solitary exercise in a darkened room, cutting off the senses sometimes, like putting a mindfold mask on. That's just a type of blindfold, a sleeping mask. That's useful. Music is a good cue. I like to find music that serves as a good emotional trigger, and what to think about, what to process. How do you conjure these negative emotions? Well, what was on your mind recently? Where have your emotions been going that day? If it's anger, you can replay the thing in your mind that makes you angry and go into it. So the whole point of this technique, by the way, I learned from someone. He's not really big. He doesn't have an online presence much at all, but I actually sounds kind of kooky, but I did have a teacher at one point who felt that this technique worked for him, and I had a lot of emotional difficulties at that time. And he taught me this technique. He didn't really have a name for it, but we came upon a name, dive technique, because you are diving into this quote unquote negative emotion and allowing it to express itself fully to the point where not only does the emotional energy purge from your system, but the portions of the personality that have been ego, that have been sectioned off and kind of become maligned by this, allow themselves to come out, which are just repressions. They're like you could have repressed confidence, repressed masculinity, femininity, sexualities of various kinds, sadness, grief, traumas from childhood, and so on. That is really quite fascinating. That the ego manages to be able to compartmentalize itself and ensconce the emotional trauma as a form of protecting it from further damage. So finding it as an adult is the challenge. We have these layers and layers of protective systems that need to be unveiled through expressing safety and comfort and so on. When a lot of us, I think, that have emotional traumas, like we have trouble crying, we have trouble letting it out as such, and we learn not to do that because it puts us in a dangerous position, a vulnerable position. So unwinding the repression is what the process is, and it takes a long time. I mean, repeatedly, if you were to do this exercise 2-3 times a week, I mean, you'll revisit the same feeling for years, but it sure feels great when you do. So like tapping into, let's say, some emotion from the childhood in the form of grief, you will find that the tears and the emotions that come out under pressure. So it's really quite amazing. Like the system has this stored up and is looking for a vein for someone to strike oil, to poke a hole in this defensive mechanism, and the emotions come out under pressure. It's amazing. So in Kabbalah, the element water represents the emotions, and that makes sense. Specifically, the oceans, and we cry salt water like the oceans, and it represents the emotions. The element water represents the emotions, which is very appropriate. Emotions are fluid-like in the body. they tend to come out in the form of tears and mucus when we cry, when we express those emotions. And we really want to go through the exercise of clearing this gunk out. So one thing that I found useful is to find a piece of music that I listen to on my headphones that services as the emotional trigger. You can play it on repeat, anything to conjure that emotion. So what are we doing here? Let's go back to the theory. Instead of repressing the emotions, which we tend to do, we tend to blame ourselves, blame the emotions because they don't feel good. So we go, oh, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. Numb it up. Numb it, numb it, numb it. Take drugs, take meds, drink alcohol, bury it, bury it, bury it, bury it, which only tends to make it worse. There's an intelligence to this emotion. It's a part of your system that needs to be acknowledged and expressed, and it kind of resolves itself. It heals itself. So that's another thing about this that has really impressed me. What's impressed me about the emotional system is it's very logical. It makes perfect sense. These emotions are inconvenient at times. It's you have to kind of repress them in the moment because you can't have outbursts while you're at the bank or at family gatherings and such. But all the emotions really want is they want to be acknowledged and they want to be expressed. And you don't need to express them to anybody else but yourself. In fact, when it comes to drawing boundaries with people, it's better if you don't. It's better if you purge the emotions, the energy from your system first, and then you can address them and state your boundaries unemotionally to other people that is acting from a more adult, mature place versus hosing people with your emotions. But when you have a lot of emotional energy stored up, it tends to leak out, right? So you have outbursts. You get overly emotional about things. You don't state what you need from people in a rational, unemotional way. The emotions come out. You're hosing other people. You're hosing yourself. You're having outbursts and all these things. And then there are all these labels that the people put on it in terms of this disorder, that disorder. But really, we want to create a space to explore the feeling of the emotion, and that comes coupled with a thought usually. So you have some thought that of how someone treated you, and that angers you. You can just kind of replay that mentally and dig a little deeper and dig deeper and give yourself permission to feel that emotion, whatever it is. Could be a hot emotion, a cold emotion, and the music can be helpful, and it takes time. It's a trial and error process in order to get a good purge, which is what you're after. Types of purging: dry heaving. I've had full-on vomiting, shaking, tears, rage attacks that ultimately will subside. But the logic in the emotional system is that these feelings really want to be acknowledged and expressed rather than suppressed and blamed. So, as I said, right, there's a reason for suppression, but as a long-term strategy, suppression and self-blame over the emotions really makes you unwell, and allowing them to be acknowledged and expressed is the first tendency when it comes to doing this is to avoid it. And that's because it all feels bad until post-purge happens. So if it's a negative emotion, you're not going to want to go indulging in that because that makes you feel worse temporarily. Things feel worse until they feel better. The act of purging itself, whether it's crying, dry heaving, whatever it is, that also doesn't feel great. But afterwards, do you feel a zillion times better? Oh my God, it's like there's no comparison. You feel naturally happy. You feel like your true self. You feel healthier, brighter, unburdened. It's really just amazing. And just my personal theory, I think the impact on mental and physical health are quite profound. But we lose the ability to go there, and most of us have met an older person who is really crusty, like they've become hard. They've become just totally ensconced in these, and when they become proud of it, when they become almost arrogant of that pain, which is often misinterpret it as strength. Then the person is just too far gone. Like they can't find it. Like, oh, I haven't cried in 20 years. I haven't cried in 10 years. That's really, really, really not good. So I wish you well in doing this. It's a very valuable technique, and I think in my own experience, the biggest hurdle has been my own resistance to doing it. And that's another protective mechanism, right? The protective mechanisms of the ego are there to say, don't go there, don't do it. It's dangerous. It's not safe to go doing it. And the more often I do it, the better I feel. And going into something like there's a lot of shame too, like going into an emotion like fear or anger. There's all kinds of treasures in there if you do it. I find the anger is some kind of unexpressed, very healthy masculine energy that I was maybe raised not to express. Some very healthy part of my personality that really just wants to get out. It's very innocent things. You'll find some very interesting yin and yang interplay between emotions that appear to be complete opposites. Like if you're sad, you'll go to a place where the sadness will flip to anger. You'll say things like, I'm angry that I'm so sad, or I'm sad that I'm so angry. Because it's really just kind of all one general fluid-like modality of pain that can become hot and defensive or turn inward and become self-pitying and depressive, self-damaging and low energy. Can become low energy and depressive, or hot and expressive and angry and warlike and go on the warpath against somebody else. But I wish you well. I think it's yielded tremendous results every time I've tried it, and I encourage you to let me know how it's going for you. Thanks, and have a great day, and happy diving.